I should have never returned to Hollowtide Coast. Even now, as I write this with trembling fingers and lungs still aching from salt that was never meant to be breathed, I feel the pull of the water beneath the cliffs. It whispers my name with the patience of a predator, as though the tide itself is waiting for me to forget the terror long enough to step too close again. My earliest memory is not of a face or a voice but of water, violent, cold, and impossibly dark. I was 8 when I drowned for the first time. It took years for my parents to admit that part out loud. The doctors used gentler phrases. Near drowning, extended submersion, miraculous survival. My mother, hands shaking as she braided my hair, would whisper, "You were gone, Elen. We saw you gone." And yet I came back, sputtering brine and crying as though some part of me understood that I had crossed a threshold I was never meant to survive. I had stayed away for 18 years, and for 18 years I dreamed of the sea that should have killed me. Not the sea as it truly looked, gray and slapping against the rocks, but a deeper version of it, a blackness so complete it seemed to swallow light itself. In the dreams, I floated weightless, watching pale shapes drift beneath me like souls unanchored from flesh. I always woke before they could breach the surface. Always, until the night my father died. His voice was rough on the voicemail he left me, as though he'd been shouting for hours. He only said 8 words. "They're calling again, Ellie. They want you back." He died the next morning. I drove straight to Hollowtide Coast, not to mourn him. Grief came later in stuttering waves, but because I needed to know who was calling. Or what? The house I grew up in was smaller than I remembered. That happens with childhood homes. Memory has a way of stretching walls to fit emotion. The paint was peeling in long curls that reminded me of dead skin, and the door hinges groaned like something asleep for too long. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the faint tang of seaweed my father used to track in on his boots. I tried to brace myself for the emptiness, for the absence of a man who had raised me as his only child after my mother's death. But the strangeness hit me in other ways. All the windows facing the sea were covered from the inside, boards nailed up hastily, as though my father had done it in a panic. The living room curtains were gone. So were the mirrors. Every reflective surface had been turned toward the wall. The house felt blind. I found his last journal on the kitchen table, open to a page written in handwriting jagged with fear. She dreams again. The tide is speaking to her. It wants what it lost. The room tilted. I gripped the table, my pulse hammering. My father had always been rational, grounded, resistant to superstition, even when the town whispered about Hollowtide like it was cursed. For him to write something like that, I turned the page. I hear it now too, only at night, only when the waves are black. I think it took her mother. I think it tried to take her. God forgive me, I think it will take her still. My hands went cold. My mother's death had never made sense. She'd fallen from the cliffs and drowned when I was barely old enough to remember her face. It had been written off as an accident, a tragic slip, a storm surge, a misstep. But I had always suspected something else. Something in the way the ocean below Hollowtide moved, how it never reflected sunlight, how even seagulls avoided flying directly above it. The surface always looked thicker there, as though it held weight. I stepped away from the journal and went to the window, pushing aside the board my father had nailed up. The sight of the water punched a hole in my lungs. The waves were dark, too dark, and moving strangely, folding over each other as though stirred from beneath. I didn't realize I was leaning closer until my breath fogged the glass. That was when I heard it. A voice, not spoken, not heard through the ears, but felt deep inside the chest like a memory I had tried to drown. Elen. My fingers tightened on the window frame. The room felt colder. The air seemed to hum. "Come back." I staggered away, heart pounding. The voice dissolved the moment my back touched the opposite wall, leaving me shaking and furious at myself. I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't imagining things. But that voice, it was the same one from my dreams. I pressed my palms to my eyes, trying to breathe. Grief, exhaustion, the shock of my father's death. Any of these could have been distorting reality. I clung to that explanation for the sake of my sanity. Someone knocked on the front door. The sound made me jump. It wasn't timid, it was deliberate, almost urgent. I wasn't ready for company, for condolences, for anything. Still, I forced myself toward the door and opened it a crack. A man stood on the porch, soaked to the bone. His clothes clung to him as though he'd been dragged from the sea. Only moments before, dark hair plastered to his forehead, water dripping from his lashes, breath emerging in uneven bursts. But his eyes, those unnerved me most. They were pale, almost gray, and lacked something vital. They looked like eyes that had seen the world from beneath the water. He knew me before I spoke a word. "Elen," he rasped. My throat tightened. "Do I know you?" His expression flickered. Pain? Recognition? Something darker? Rain or perhaps seawater dripped from his jawline. "You shouldn't have come back," he murmured. "Not now. Not when it's stronger." "What is?" I asked, gripping the door. He glanced toward the cliffs, toward the ocean swirling beyond them, and swallowed. "The tide. The real tide." A chill crawled over my spine. "Who are you?" He looked at me the way someone might look at a photograph of a dead friend. "You don't remember me?" he whispered, and something inside me twisted unexpectedly. An instinctive flicker of certainty that I should know him, that a name rested on the edge of my tongue. But before I could speak, he staggered forward and grabbed my shoulders. His grip was ice cold. "Listen to me," he said, voice raw. "The ocean here, it doesn't just drown people. It empties them, takes what they feel, what they are. If you hear it calling, you run. Do you understand? You run." I froze. His words hit too close to the truth. My dreams, the voice at the window, the way the waves had always felt alive. "Let go," I whispered. He didn't. "Please," he said, and in that moment, something shifted inside him. His expression softened, the gray in his eyes warming just a little. "I tried to stop it before. I tried to save you. I didn't do enough." The wind slammed against the house, but his voice dropped to a strange and terrible calm. "It remembers you, Elen, and it doesn't forget what belongs to it." I wrenched free from his grip and stumbled back. "You need to leave." He opened his mouth as though to argue, and then a distant sound cut through the air. Not thunder, not wind, a rumble from the shoreline below, like a crowd whispering in unison. He froze, eyes widening. "No, not now." He backed away from the porch, gaze locked on some point behind me. Then he turned and ran, literally ran, down the path toward the cliffs, as though fleeing something only he could see. I slammed the door shut and pressed my back against it. I waited. 1 minute. 2. Silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful. It felt like the house was holding its breath. I tried to calm myself, telling my mind to let the fear pass, but the fear didn't pass. It grew roots. I checked the door lock twice, then moved through the house, turning on every light. Light made me feel safer, even though I knew the sea outside didn't fear it. In the hallway, my reflection stared back at me from the only mirror my father hadn't taken down. I paused. My eyes looked too wide, my skin too pale. And then, I swear, the reflection's lips parted a moment after mine did. A fraction too slow. I stepped back, pulse skyrocketing. That couldn't be real. I blinked, shaking, and forced myself to look again. Just a mirror. Just me. But the house suddenly seemed too silent, the air too heavy. My father's journal sat open in the kitchen like a warning, and the sound of the waves drifted through the boarded windows. Steady, rhythmic, almost patient. Night fell quickly at Hollowtide, faster than anywhere I'd ever lived. It was as if the sun didn't want to linger here longer than necessary. I tried sleeping. I really did. But the dreams came too quickly. I stood on the cliff edge, barefoot, the stones sharp beneath my heels. Below, the ocean churned with inky violence. A figure surfaced, pale and long-limbed, drifting upward like a corpse freed from gravity. I leaned in closer, too close. The figure's face broke the surface. It was me. Her eyes opened, black, tidal, endless. Her lips moved. "Come back." I jolted awake, gasping. The house was pitch dark. I hadn't turned off the lights. I sat up slowly, every muscle drawn tight with dread. The air smelled faintly of salt, and the whispering, faint but unmistakable, drifted from the direction of the living room. I rose from the bed, feet unsteady on the floorboards. The whispering grew clearer with each step. Not voices, not words. A single breath repeated over and over, in and out, like someone or something was practicing the rhythm of human breathing. I reached the living room doorway and stopped. The front door was open, wide open. I hadn't touched it. Wind tore through the entryway, scattering papers from the kitchen. The lights flickered, and beyond the porch, down the path, I saw movement. A shape slipping behind the rocks. A shape moving toward the cliffs, toward the water. A thought struck me with brutal clarity. The man from earlier never passed me coming back up the path. If he'd run toward the cliffs, then he had only one place left to go: the ocean. A sense of dread I can't describe pulled me forward, made me step outside despite every instinct screaming to stay inside. The night air was sharp and wet, clinging to my clothes instantly. The whispering grew louder. I followed the path down toward the cliffs, each step crunching against gravel and sea-worn stone. The waves crashed harder now, sending sprays of cold mist up the jagged walls. When I reached the edge, I looked down and froze. He stood in the surf, waist deep, staring out into the blackness. The water around him churned unnaturally, forming spirals and ridges like hands pressing upward from beneath. "Hey!" I shouted. He didn't turn. I took a step closer to the drop, heart hammering. "You need to get out of there." Slowly, painfully slowly, he lifted his head. His face was wrong, too pale, too blank, as if drained of everything that made him human. He opened his mouth. The voice that came out wasn't his. It wasn't human at all. "Elen." The waves surged upward. I stumbled back, slipping on wet stone, the cliff's edge crumbling beneath my boots. I grabbed a jut of rock just in time, nails tearing as the tide roared beneath me. The man's body convulsed once, violently, and then was yanked under the water as though a hook had driven into his spine. He didn't scream. The water went still, completely still, as though satisfied. I crawled back from the edge, scrambling to my feet, cold down to the marrow. And then I heard it again. Not from the ocean this time. From behind me, a voice, soft as a breath against my ear. "Welcome back, Elen." I whirled around, heart thundering, but the path behind me was empty. The wind clawed at my hair and clothes, yet the whisper came again, insistent, intimate, curling around my mind like smoke. "Come to me." My feet moved before I could stop them, drawn by something older than reason, older than fear. The cliff's edge loomed before me, black water stretching into a void that made the night sky look pale and weak. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but my legs ignored it. The tide was different now, alive. I could see it undulate, not like waves but like a breathing creature, rising and falling with purpose. Shadows slithered beneath the surface, pale, long shapes that seemed to watch me. And then I saw them. Faces, or something like faces, rising briefly from the water. Hollow eyes, gaping mouths, silent screams. Their expressions were frozen in agony. My stomach clenched, bile rising, but I couldn't look away. "They want you." The voice breathed into my skull. "You belong here." I fell to my knees on the wet stones, hands pressing to the ground, gripping it as though it could hold me in the world. But the sea had already reached for me in ways I could not resist. The water rippled, extending its dark fingers toward the shore, and I felt the pull. Not physical, but inside me, in my chest, my mind, my bones. It wanted my fear. It wanted my grief. It wanted me. I screamed. My voice was weak and small against the roar of the ocean, swallowed instantly. My scream didn't matter. Nothing mattered. I could feel myself unraveling. And then the voice spoke again, this time from somewhere behind me. Human. Fragile. Real. "Elen, stop." I turned. A figure emerged from the darkness of the path above. A woman. Tall, cloaked in seaweed-stained fabric, hair black as the void itself, and eyes that burned with an unnatural light. She ran toward me, boots slipping on stone, hands outstretched. "You have to fight it," she yelled. Her voice carried over the wind and the water in a way that made my ears ring. "It doesn't want you alive. It wants you empty." Empty. The word echoed inside me like a bell tolling in an abandoned church. I felt the hollowness it described, the creeping loss of myself, the slow pulling away of every memory, every hope, every fragment of who I was. "I can't," I whispered. My lips were trembling. My knees shook. My hands felt like lead. "It's too strong." "No," she shouted, gripping my shoulders, eyes piercing mine with something fierce and terrible. "Your father didn't die in vain. You survived it once. You can survive it again." I wanted to believe her. I tried. But the tide had reached my ankles now, the water sucking at my shoes, pulling me closer, whispering promises of freedom, of weightlessness, of peace that came only from giving up. Give in. I stumbled backward, gripping a jagged stone for support. The dark water shimmered with reflections of my deepest fears, showing me every shame, every guilt, every regret I tried to bury. Faces swam just below the surface. My mother's, my father's, the man from the porch. Eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams. The woman's hands stayed on my shoulders. "Focus. Focus on me. On yourself. Remember who you are." And for a moment I did. I remembered my name, Elen. I remembered the taste of fresh air, of sunlight, of grass beneath my bare feet as a child. I remembered laughter that had long ago been swallowed by grief. I remembered my mother's hand, warm and real, not the ghostly reflection the tide tried to show me. I screamed, not from fear, but from defiance. "No!" I roared, pushing against the pull, against the tide, against the dark sea that wanted to hollow me. My voice cracked, raw and shaking, but it carried with it something alive, something real. The water surged against me, higher, faster, but I held my ground. And then, impossibly, the tide faltered. The shapes beneath the surface writhed and hissed, retreating slightly as though confused by my resistance. The woman exhaled sharply. "Good, hold on." I looked at her, gasping, water lapping at my knees. Her eyes were wide, and for the first time, I noticed her face. Sharp cheekbones, pale skin, lips drawn tight in concentration. She radiated a strange energy, something beyond human, something that could stand against the ocean itself. "They took me once," she said in a quieter voice. "The tide. It nearly claimed me, but I survived. And now it thinks it can take you. But you're stronger than it believes. You are not hollow. You are not empty. You are flesh and blood and fire. And it cannot consume fire." The words, spoken aloud, reverberated through me. I could feel something stirring, a light, a pulse, a warmth that was entirely mine. My fingers dug into the stone at my feet. My chest rose and fell with forceful breaths. The tide surged one final time, towering like a wall of black glass, ready to swallow me whole. I planted my feet, raised my arms, and shouted. Not a plea, not a cry, a declaration. "I am Elen. I am not yours." The water hit me, cold and relentless, but it was different now. I met it with my own defiance, letting the warmth inside me fight against the hollowing cold. The tide shrieked in ways that were impossible for human ears, twisting and churning, but it began to pull back, like a storm reluctant to end. The woman's hands fell from my shoulders, and she stumbled slightly, exhausted, but smiling faintly. "You did it, you stood. You remembered who you are." I gasped for air, trembling, knees shaking. Around me, the water settled into a dark, rolling calm. Not friendly, not safe, but it had lost its immediate claim over me. For now, the cliff was silent except for the wind and the distant crash of normal waves beyond the black tide. I sank to the rocks, shivering, staring at the water. It seemed to watch me back, patient, as if it had learned nothing and everything at once. "I
"He survived?" he whispered.
Yes, she said softly. But surviving isn't enough. Not here. Not now. It will come again. And next time, it may not let go. I looked at her. Who are you? She hesitated. Her gaze drifted to the sea. Someone who's lost more than I should have. Someone who knows the cost. And someone who will not let it take you without a fight. I nodded, though my body shook. Then what now? She looked at the tide, then back at me. Now you learn. You remember. You prepare. Hollowtide Coast does not forgive Elen. And it never forgets. The water seemed to sigh, a slow, deliberate exhale. The darkness of it pressed toward me again. A reminder. A threat. I knew that the real challenge had only just begun. And deep inside, I felt it, the first flicker of something dangerous, something terrifyingly addictive. The pull of the hollow tide. The call to let go. To surrender. But I would not. Not yet. Not until I understood it. I looked down at the black waves, at the swirling shapes beneath, and I swore to myself, voice low but steady, I will not be yours. The wind carried the whisper back to me anyway. Soft, faint, insidious. Not yet. I shivered. Not from the cold, but from the realization that surviving was only the beginning. The sea would wait. It always waited. And I knew, somewhere deep in the marrow of my bones, that it would be back for me. And I would have to face it, alone or not at all. The following days passed in a blur of exhaustion and dread. Sleep came reluctantly, bringing with it dreams of the tide, dreams that no longer paused before showing me the horrors beneath the surface. Faces of those who had drowned, or been hollowed, drifted through the black water. Sometimes their mouths moved, whispering my name. Other times they just stared, eyes empty, accusing. I stayed in my father's house, though the walls felt thinner, the air heavier. The woman, whose name I still didn't know, visited at night, always appearing at the door, soaked from the coastal fog, always bringing warnings and half-truths. They call to you, she said one night, sitting cross-legged on the floor, hands folded over her knees. Her eyes reflected the moonlight through the boarded windows. They know your scent. They've waited for you. The tide remembers the first time you touched it. It remembers the hollowing, and it will try to finish what it started. I shivered, wrapping my arms around my knees. Why me? Why does it want me? She looked at me like I'd asked a question she'd asked herself 1,000 times. Because you survived. Once. That makes you dangerous to it. It wants what it couldn't take. It wants control. Hollowtide doesn't forgive failure. I remembered the first time I had fallen into that ocean. The way my chest had burned underwater, lungs clawing for air, the hollow sensation that had crept inside me even before I could scream. I had come back, but only barely. The thought of going back there willingly now made me tremble from the inside out. I can't go back there, I said, voice breaking. I almost lost myself last night. I felt it, like my soul was slipping away. She nodded. And that's exactly why you must learn to go back. You must face it before it fully claims you. Otherwise, one day, you'll wake and realize there's nothing left inside to fight with. Her words should have terrified me more than they already did. But strangely, they lit a fire. A dangerous fire, yes, but one that wouldn't let me sit paralyzed any longer. Somehow, I knew she was right. Avoiding the tide was impossible. It was patient, endless, and relentless. And it wanted me. I spent the next hours in restless preparation. I couldn't leave the house, never safely, but I could plan, observe, and understand. I watched the tide from the cliff's edge every day, even in the rain and fog. I noticed subtle changes, the way the black water shifted, patterns forming in the waves, almost like a heartbeat. It wasn't just water. It was intelligence. And it was waiting. The woman came again that evening, and this time she brought tools. Not weapons, at least not traditional ones. Candles, salts, ropes, items I didn't recognize at first. You'll need them, she said. The tide reacts to certain energies, to anchors in the physical world. If you try to resist it without understanding, you'll be hollowed anyway. I studied the items, skepticism coiling in my chest. "This works." "It has to," she said, "or we die trying." Her bluntness should have unsettled me more, but instead it gave clarity. There was no room for denial, for hesitation. I had to learn, and fast. That night I went to the cliff again, standing at the very edge. The tide had risen, creeping higher than usual, dark waves licking the rocks like tongues. I could feel the pull, deeper than muscle, like it was trying to unravel me from the inside out. I held the candles in my hands, lighting them one by one. The flickering flames felt absurd against the immense darkness of the sea, but they anchored me, gave me focus. "Remember who you are," I whispered to myself, gripping the rope she had handed me. The fabric felt rough, grounding, connecting me to something real. I stepped closer to the edge, ignoring the water that surged against my ankles. The tide pulsed, black and hungry, sending ripples that reminded me of veins, of reaching hands. The shapes beneath the surface twisted, contorted, beckoning me. Faces appeared, but this time I didn't let myself look at them fully. I looked past them, at the faint shimmer of the horizon, at the candles burning in my hands, at my own reflection in the wet stones. A whisper floated up again, soft and cruel. "Come. You know you want to." I took a deep breath. I tightened my grip on the rope, grounding myself. And I whispered back, voice firm despite the tremor inside. "No." The water surged in response, higher now, striking at the cliffs with a force that made stones tremble beneath my feet. I could hear the hollowed voices now, not from the surface but from inside my head. Screams, laughter, crying, all twisting together into a single, incomprehensible sound. I stumbled, nearly falling, and then felt a hand on my shoulder. The woman had appeared silently behind me, holding a candle of her own. She pressed it to my side, warmth spreading through me in a way that cut through the icy pull of the tide. "Focus on the flame. Feel it, not the water. The tide can only pull what you give it." I closed my eyes and concentrated. The flickering candlelight became everything. The tide's whispers faded slightly as I held onto that warmth, onto the small flame, like a heartbeat inside me. Minutes or hours, time felt meaningless, passed. The pull of the tide weakened, and the water began to recede, pulling back reluctantly as though it had underestimated my strength. I opened my eyes to see the sea calm, black waves rolling gently now, not reaching for me, but waiting, patient, watchful. The woman exhaled, finally letting go of my shoulder. "You did well." Most would have faltered by now. Most would be hollowed already. I sank to my knees, exhausted beyond anything I had ever felt. My limbs shook violently, my teeth chattering. "I don't know if I can do this again," I admitted, voice barely above a whisper. She knelt beside me. "You'll have to, because it will come back. Stronger, smarter, and next time you won't have the same chance. That is the law of Hollowtide." I swallowed hard, staring at the black water. Its patience was terrifying, its inevitability even more. And I knew, somewhere deep in my gut, that resisting it was only the first step. Surviving it would take more than courage. It would take knowledge, cunning, and a willingness to embrace the darkness without letting it claim me. And in the night, beneath the stars barely visible through the fog, I realized something else. The tide wasn't just outside. It had always been inside me. The hollowing, the pull, the whispers, they were part of me as much as the fear and grief I carried. And if I was going to survive Hollowtide Coast, I would have to confront that part of myself before it consumed me completely. The fog never really lifted from Hollowtide Coast. It clung to the cliffs, swirled in the hollows of the trees, thickened the air until it felt like a wall pressing in on you. No matter how far you walked, you could never escape it. It had become a part of me, as much as the tide. A permanent weight on my chest. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the strange rituals the woman had shown me to protect myself, to stave off the tide's pull, but I couldn't. My thoughts kept drifting back to what she had said. The tide is inside you too. I hadn't fully understood it at first, but now, Each time I closed my eyes, it gnawed at me. I could feel it inside, small, like a splinter just beneath the surface of my skin, scratching at my mind. I wasn't just fighting the sea, I was fighting whatever part of me it had already claimed. It wasn't until the third night after our ritual on the cliff that I realized just how far the tide's influence had gone. The woman, whose name I still realized I had never asked, came to the house again. She looked worse than before, her face pale, gaunt, as though she hadn't slept or eaten in days. Her eyes, though, were sharper than ever. There was a hunger in them. "You're weakening," she said simply, without preamble. She stepped into the house without waiting for an invitation, her wet boots leaving dark imprints on the floor. "What are you talking about?" I asked, closing the door behind her. The last thing I wanted was to seem weak in front of her, but I couldn't stop the tremor in my voice. "You're already slipping," she said, not unkindly. "I've been watching you. Your dreams, they've changed." I swallowed, feeling the sting of panic climb my throat. I had been trying to ignore the dreams. The dreams were growing worse every night, more vivid, more real. I was drowning again, but this time I could see it. I could see the faces beneath the water. The shapes were no longer just shadows or vague reflections. They were real. Their eyes watched me. Their hands reached for me, begging me to come closer. "I'm not slipping," I said quickly, my words too fast. "I'm not." "You are." She cut me off, her voice hard, without room for denial. "I've seen it before. The tide doesn't just take your soul. It grows inside of you, too. You can't just resist it by fighting the water. You have to confront it within yourself. The sooner you face it, the better chance you have." "Face it?" I asked, incredulous. "You want me to embrace it?" She shook her head slowly, dark strands of hair falling over her face. "I want you to understand it. Understand where it comes from. You felt the pull. It's not just the ocean. It's part of this place, Elen. The land itself is soaked in it. Hollowtide isn't just a coast. It's a curse." I shuddered at the word. Curse, it felt too real now, too close to home. "The people here," she continued, her voice softer now, "they never leave. They can't. Not truly. Even if they run. The tide is inside them, too. It feeds on fear, grief, regret. But most of all, it feeds on remembrance." I looked away, trying to focus on anything other than her words. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the sound felt distant, hollow, like it was coming from another world entirely. "You think you're the first to feel the call?" She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You're not. Your father fought it too. He tried to protect you from it." My heart stopped. I froze, eyes wide, my breath coming short. "What do you mean?" "My father, he just died." She looked at me, her expression grave. "I wasn't supposed to tell you. He swore to keep it hidden. But you need to know. Your father didn't just drown when he died. The tide doesn't let you drown, Elen. Takes you, pulls you. It doesn't care if you're alive or dead." I took a step back. "What are you saying?" "The way your father died." Her voice grew even quieter. "He didn't die from the storm or the waves. The tide claimed him, just like it claimed your mother." I could barely breathe, my head spinning. The fog in the room thickened, the edges of the room warping.
No, y whispered.
"You're lying." She didn't flinch. "It hollowed him out. And in his last moments, your father, he must have realized what I already know. That the only way to escape the tide is to become a part of it. That's why he left the house to you, Elen. He knew it was the only way you might survive." I stumbled backward, my knees hitting the floor. "No." My voice cracked. "No, this can't be real." She knelt beside me, her cold hands resting gently on my shoulders. "It's the truth, and you need to face it because this place isn't just a place. It's a prison. Hollowtide Coast holds more than just the ocean. It holds everyone who's ever come here, and the tide keeps them, keeps their memories, their pieces." A horrifying thought gripped me. The people, the faces, beneath the water. Are they? I couldn't say it. The words were too terrible to form. They're part of it, she said softly. When you drown here, you don't just die. The tide takes you, and it leaves nothing behind. But what it leaves, what it takes, is a part of your soul. Traps it in the water. Feeds on it. Your father, your mother, they're down there, Elen, somewhere. Trapped. Waiting. And it will take you, too, if you let it. I stared at her in horror, unable to speak. I felt my pulse thundering in my throat. Waiting. The tide wasn't just a force of nature. It was a trap. And it knew me. It had always known me. She stood up slowly, the floorboards creaking beneath her. You're not just fighting the sea. You're fighting the memories of everyone who's ever been taken by it. And the more you remember, the stronger it gets. But if you let it, if you give in completely, it will consume everything. Every memory. Every piece of you. My mind reeled, my stomach turning. The faces in the water, the endless whispers, they were my family. My past. I had always felt them, lingering just beneath the surface. Now I knew why. Elen. Her voice snapped me back to reality. She was standing by the door, her hand resting on the handle. There's one thing you need to know. Your father didn't die by accident. He gave himself to the tide willingly. He knew he couldn't stop it, but he hoped that by giving in, by offering himself, he could protect you. Keep you from being taken. The words hit me like a blow. So that's what this is about. You want me to give in? I stood up shakily.
No.
I won't be a part of this. I won't let it take me like it took them. She shook her head slowly. You don't have a choice, Elen. You can't run from it. You can't hide from it. The tide will find you again. And this time it will want you. Your father's sacrifice wasn't enough. No one's is. I stepped toward her, feeling the familiar rush of anger and fear. Then what am I supposed to do? You think I can just give up? Let it take me? She didn't answer at first, her gaze moving toward the window, her face reflecting the dim light of the candles. The wind howled outside, but the house felt unnervingly still. No, she said, her voice low, almost mournful. But you need to understand. The tide doesn't just drown. It hollows, and the longer you fight it, the more you lose. It will claim you piece by piece, until nothing's left. I could feel it then, deep inside, that strange shift. The tide was more than just the ocean. It was memory. It was loss. It was the part of me I couldn't ever fully escape. She left soon after that, disappearing back into the fog like a shadow slipping into the night. I watched her go, my mind reeling, but something in me, something primal, wanted to follow, to throw myself into the tide, let it claim me, let it fill that empty space inside. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not yet. The woman's words kept echoing in my mind long after she left. The tide doesn't just drown. It hollows. That phrase, that promise, or was it a threat? Pulled at something inside me. A part of me wanted to run far, far away from this place, to escape the creeping grasp of the ocean, to ignore the twisted history of Hollowtide Coast. But the other part, the part that trembled with fear and something darker, was drawn in, closer with every passing minute. Couldn't ignore it. No matter how hard I tried, the tide had already begun to take root inside me. The more I resisted, the stronger its pull seemed to grow. It was no longer just the crashing of waves or the eerie whispers that haunted my dreams. It was inside me now, in my bones, in my mind, like a second heartbeat, dark and patient, waiting for the right moment to take control. I had to know more. I had to understand what the woman had meant when she said the tide wants you. Why me? Why now? I spent the next few days in a haze, my mind consumed with questions and fear. The sea seemed to grow more restless with each passing hour, the waves beating against the shore like a drum, urging me to come closer, to give in. I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed answers. I needed to know what had happened to my father and my mother, and why they had both been claimed by the tide. I went to the town's library, a small, dusty place with shelves that creaked under the weight of forgotten stories. The town was silent, even more so than usual. The air felt heavy, as though the town itself was, holding its breath, waiting for something. Maybe it was the same thing I was waiting for. The Return of the Tide. I rifled through old journals, faded maps, and books that were older than I could comprehend. The deeper I dug, the more I found. Hollowtide Coast was cursed, yes, but the curse wasn't just a natural force. It was the remnants of something ancient, something old enough to be forgotten, yet alive enough to consume everything in its path. The town itself had been built atop a sacred ground, a place where the sea had long held dominion. The early settlers, before Hollowtide became a cursed place, had known the dangers of the ocean, but they had ignored them. They thought they could tame it, control it. They built homes, ports, and harbors, slowly encroaching upon the water's domain. And the water had reacted. The tide grew stronger, angrier. It began to claim those who were foolish enough to think they could control it. The first settlers had disappeared in the night, their homes left abandoned, their ships found drifting with no crew. The town had grown in secret, its history buried beneath layers of time, but the ocean had never forgotten. It had always been there, waiting. As I read, a chill ran through me. It wasn't just a curse. It was a memory, a hunger for those who had dared to conquer the sea. A cycle that had repeated itself for generations, each time more powerful, more insidious. Then I found it. A journal, hidden in the back of the library, its leather cover cracked and faded with age. The pages were yellowed, brittle, and when I opened it, I found a name I knew all too well. Elen Walsh, my father. The journal was written by someone who had known him before the end, someone who had worked with him on a project. A final desperate effort to free the town from the grip of the tide. The journal described the last days of the town's struggle, of the sickness that had taken hold of the people, of their growing fear. And then, there it was, the passage that made my blood run cold. The tide grows stronger each day. The people are no longer just afraid of the waves, but of the darkness beneath. It is not just the ocean. It is a force, a curse that feeds on memory. I fear that soon it will call to me, to us. My daughter, Elen. She has been chosen. The tide has already marked her. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands shaking as I held the journal. My father knew. He had known what was happening to me, what had happened to him. He had fought the tide to the end, trying to protect me. But the journal didn't end there. It went on. I can feel the change in me, the hollowing. It is slow, but it is certain. The tide comes for those who remember, those who have ties to this land. But my daughter, she will be stronger than we were. She must be. If she is to survive, she must learn the truth of Hollowtide Coast. She must understand what the sea demands. It is the only way to fight it. I could feel my breath quicken, my mind spinning with the weight of the words. My father had written this. He had known. But what had he meant? What truth had he uncovered that could save me? And why had he never told me? I slammed the journal shut, my mind reeling, the words swimming before my eyes. My father had been hollowed. He had known what it was, what it would do. And he had tried to fight it, but in the end, it had taken him. Just like it would take me. It had already started. My hand instinctively went to my chest, where the hollowing had begun. It was subtle at first, a feeling of weightlessness, like I was fading from the inside out. But now, reading those words, I understood. The tide had already started to claim me. It had been after me for longer than I realized. I had to find the truth. There had to be something more to the town's history, something buried beneath the surface, something my father had uncovered before it was too late. I rushed out of the library, my legs moving faster than I'd intended. The fog had thickened outside, curling around me like a living thing. The weight of it pressed down on me, heavy, suffocating. I could hear the waves crashing in the distance, their roar louder than ever. It was calling to me again. I had no choice. I had to go back to the cliff. I had to understand the truth, whatever it took. I reached the edge, standing on the rocks where the tide had nearly claimed me only days before. The wind whipped around me, the air thick with salt and cold. The water was darker now, more alive, the waves rising and falling with an unnatural rhythm. Just waiting, I thought, is calling. But something had changed in me. The fear that had once controlled me had shifted, deepened, into something else. something I couldn't quite name. I knew now that I couldn't fight the tide with strength alone. I had to know what it wanted. I had to know why it called to me, why it had taken my family, why it wanted me, and there, beneath the surface, I saw it. The shapes, the faces, and among them my father. His hollow eyes stared up at me, his mouth open in a silent scream. It was then that I realized the truth. The tide didn't just take lives, took memories. It was after more than just flesh. It wanted everything. The town, the people, me, and I had only one choice left: to face it, to confront it, to understand the darkness that had claimed us all. I stepped closer to the edge, feeling the pull, the tug, deep in my chest. It whispered again, "Come to me, come home." But this time I didn't hesitate. I knew what had to be done. The water churned below me, black as pitch and alive with 1,000 whispers. I could hear them now more clearly than ever. The voices of those who had come before me, who had been swallowed by the tide, their memories locked away beneath the surface. I knew in that moment that I wasn't just facing the ocean anymore. I was facing all of them. "They want you," the voices murmured in unison, as though they were all speaking with one voice. "You belong to the sea now, Elen." I staggered back, my heart thumping violently in my chest. But the pull, the need to understand, to know why the tide had chosen me, was too strong. I couldn't fight it anymore. I had to go deeper. I turned away from the edge and began to walk down the path that led toward the cliffs, the path I had only ever taken in fear before. But this time I walked with a different purpose. The air was heavy, thick with fog, and every step I took felt like it was drawing me closer to something, to the truth. The woman, who had become both a guide and a warning, had said the tide would return stronger. But what if it wasn't the tide returning? What if it was me? The memories of my father, my mother, the whispers of the faces I had seen beneath the water, they all filled my mind now, swirling together in a maelstrom of grief and rage. I had always known there was something wrong with this place, something that had been buried beneath the surface for generations. But what I hadn't known was how deeply I was tied to it. The path twisted as I descended, the rocks becoming slick beneath my boots. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. I didn't know where I was going or what I hoped to find. I only knew that the tide was waiting for me, and I couldn't delay the inevitable any longer. The cliffside opened up before me, revealing a narrow cove I had never noticed before. The sea roiled below, crashing against the rocks with a fury that seemed to reflect the storm brewing inside me. There was something unnatural about the place, a feeling of ancient power, a dark current that ran beneath the waves. I stepped closer to the edge, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. The wind howled around me, but it didn't matter. I was already lost to it. The tide surged with an eerie rhythm, rising and falling with a force that felt like it was beckoning me, urging me to surrender. I heard the whispers again, louder now, almost deafening in their intensity. I could feel their cold fingers reaching out for me, pulling at my very soul. Then, something else emerged from the depths. Something more than the faces. A shape, a figure. It rose from the water like a ghost, its features indistinct, but its presence unmistakable. It was neither man nor woman, but something in between. Something other. The figure stood on the water's surface as though it were weightless, its form shifting, as if made of the very sea itself. I froze, my heart racing. This was it, the thing I had feared, the thing that had taken my father and mother, the source of the tide's power. It spoke. "Elen." The voice was soft, soothing, yet filled with an ancient hunger that made my skin crawl. "Come to me. You are mine." I staggered back, shaking my head, but I couldn't look away. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, burned with an unnatural light, like the depths of the sea at night. There was something wrong about them, a hollow, dead emptiness that twisted my insides. "You are the last of your bloodline," the figure continued, "the last to remember. You are my heir, my vessel." I opened my mouth to scream, to cry out, but no sound came. The figure's words were suffocating, wrapping themselves around me like chains. Your father knew. It whispered, its voice threading through my mind like a needle. He fought me, but in the end he gave himself. He thought he could save you by sacrificing his soul. But his sacrifice was only the beginning. Elen, you will finish what he started. The air seemed to crackle with energy as the figure took another step forward. The water swirled around it, rising higher, closer. I could feel the pull in my chest now, like a magnet, like something inside me was reaching toward it. You are mine, it repeated, its voice darkening with a kind of twisted delight. And when I claim you, I will be whole again. I stumbled backward, my hands clawing at the rocks for support. I had to get away. I had to escape. But it was too late. The tide was already inside me. Had been there from the start. From the moment I had fallen into the water all those years ago. The moment the sea had first whispered my name. The figure, it wasn't just a creature of the sea. It was the tide itself. The hunger. The memory. I could feel it now, inside me, creeping through my veins like poison. The hollowing had begun in earnest. The parts of me that made me human. My memories, my thoughts, my desires were slipping away. Like sand through my fingers, they were vanishing. And then, something inside me snapped. I didn't know if it was fear or anger, but something dark, something deep, welled up inside me, rising like a storm. I refused to let go. With everything I had left, I gripped the rocks, my hands trembling, and I looked at the figure. Not with fear, but with defiance. I refused to let it take me. The figure seemed to falter for a moment, its expression, if it could even be called that, shifting as if surprised. You cannot escape your nature, it said, its voice now laced with frustration. You are part of the sea. You always have been. But in that moment, something shifted. The power of the sea, the tide, the hunger. It was still there, but it felt distant, fainter, like it had been momentarily distracted. I was part of the sea. I had always been. But I was also more. The woman's words echoed in my mind. You are not hollow. You are not empty. You are flesh and blood and fire. And it cannot consume fire. Fire. I took a deep breath, a new surge of strength coursing through me. I didn't have to defeat the tide. I didn't have to fight it. I just had to remember what I was. I am not yours. The words burned in my chest, igniting something deep within. I had always believed the tide was a force that could only destroy. But I was wrong. The tide was part of me, but I was not its prisoner. I could fight it. I could remember. The figure recoiled as if struck, its form flickering, momentarily weakening. The water around me began to retreat, the pull loosening, the whispers dying down. But the figure wasn't finished. It screamed in fury, a sound that echoed across the coast like a storm, a wind that would tear apart anything in its path. You cannot fight your bloodline. You cannot fight me, it howled. But I could, and I would. The tide roared beneath me, a furious, crashing storm of sound and rage. But the figure, the embodiment of the tide itself, seemed to falter, its form flickering in and out of existence like a bad memory, trying and failing to hold its shape. I could feel it, the force that had claimed generations of my ancestors, the force that had devoured my family's very souls. It wanted me, but something inside me had changed. The power that had swelled within me in that moment, when I refused to let the tide take me, wasn't something I understood, but it was real. I could feel it coursing through my veins, a fire I didn't recognize but that burned brighter with every second. It wasn't just defiance. It was connection. I was no longer just a part of the sea. I was something else entirely. Something that had always been inside me, waiting to be awakened. I took a step forward, my feet firm on the wet rocks. The tide had retreated slightly, the waves pulling back as if they were uncertain of my power. I had the fleeting sense that the sea, the force that controlled it all, had underestimated me. You are not like your father, the figure said, its voice distorted, as if it was struggling to maintain its presence. He gave himself to me. He understood what you do not. You cannot fight your bloodline. You are mine. I shook my head slowly. You're wrong, I said, my voice steady. I am not yours. I am not my father, and I will not be hollowed. I will not let you claim me. The figure recoiled again, its form twisting in an almost grotesque manner, the water surrounding it rising higher. The sea's energy surged, thrashing against the rocks, its hunger palpable. But now I felt it was afraid. Afraid of me. I knew, then, that the tide was a force of memory and loss, yes. But it was also old, ancient. It was tethered to this land, to the curse that had claimed my ancestors. And now, it was bound by the blood that had flowed through them. And through me, I reached out with the power inside me. Not just my fear, not just my will, but something deeper, something older. The tide could not claim me, because I was both the blood of those who had been taken and the fire that had always survived. I was the bridge between the forgotten and the living, between the hollowed and those who still had breath. The figure twisted and writhed in the water, a distorted mass of rage and frustration. You do not understand what you are. You are nothing but a vessel for the tide's hunger. You will serve it as they all did before you. But as it spoke, I felt the heat in my chest surge higher. The fire within me burned brighter, blinding now. I extended my arms, palms facing outward, and pushed. The air crackled with energy. The sea responded, churning violently, but it couldn't match the force I had found within myself. The flames of defiance, of memory, of the bloodline that refused to be hollowed. These were my power now. They fed me, they protected me. The figure shrieked in agony, its form unraveling, the tendrils of the sea collapsing in on themselves as the tide tried to withdraw, to reclaim control. But it was too late. I could feel the weight of the water trying to suffocate me, trying to pull me under, but I fought back with everything I had. The fire within me wasn't just resistance. It was strength. It was control. And then I understood. The tide didn't just feed on the past. It relied on it. The memories of those it had claimed. My father, my mother, all of them were like fuel, keeping the curse alive. But memories could also be broken. The past could be rewritten. I closed my eyes for a moment, focusing, drawing on everything I had learned. The faces beneath the waves. The whispers that had plagued me since my childhood. The hollow feeling that had clung to me, just beneath the surface like a second skin. And then I let go. I released the grip I had on the energy I had summoned, allowing it to flow outward, cascading like a wave of heat and light. The figure screamed once more, its voice raw with pain, as the waves recoiled, the ocean itself recoiling from the force I had unleashed. The figure's form shattered, disintegrating into dark fragments that were swallowed by the retreating tide. The water surged one last time, as if the very sea was writhing in agony. The roar of the waves echoed in the air, a sound like the death cry of a creature that had lived far too long. But it was over. The figure was gone. The tide was weakening. I stood there, chest heaving, my body trembling with the aftermath of the battle. The air felt different now, lighter, less oppressive. The fog that had enveloped the coast began to thin, as though the very land itself was exhaling in relief. But there was no time to rest. I had won the battle, yes, but the tide was not easily defeated. I knew that now. The water still held its grip on Hollowtide Coast, and there was still so much I didn't understand. I turned away from the shore, my steps slow and deliberate. I had broken the curse, or at least begun to, but there was something I still needed to find. There was something more to this place, something more to my family's connection to the sea. I knew what I had to do next. I walked back toward the cliffs, the rocks beneath my feet steady now, no longer shaking with the weight of the curse. The sea still whispered, but now it was a distant, empty sound. The tide was still there, but its pull had been weakened. It was no longer a presence that sought to devour everything in its path. It was simply a force, a part of the land, but no longer in control. The woman appeared on the path ahead, her face unreadable. She looked at me, her eyes somber. But there was something else there, a recognition, a respect. "You did it," she said quietly. I nodded, my voice hoarse. "I didn't defeat it, but I stopped it from taking me. For now," She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. The tide will always be here. It will always call. But you've learned what your father learned in the end. That the past doesn't have to define us. The tide can't claim you. Not anymore. I wanted to say more, to ask her what came next, but words failed me. I was still reeling from the intensity of what had happened, from the way my body felt as though it had been burned clean from the inside out. The sea was no longer an enemy. It was a part of me, and I had learned at last how to live with it. The fog lifted completely as I stood there, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders, but also feeling lighter, freer than I had in years. The curse had not been broken entirely, but it had been weakened. And in the end, that was enough. For now. The coast was quiet now, eerily so. The usual roar of the waves had quieted, reduced to a gentle, rhythmic pulse that still tugged at my bones, but no longer with the same all-consuming hunger. It was as if the sea had exhaled, releasing its long-held breath after the battle, leaving the air heavier, more still. But I knew better than to think the threat was over. The woman, whose name I still never knew, was gone, vanished as quickly as she had appeared. I wasn't sure if she had been a part of the tide's influence or a force that had acted against it. Either way, she had played her role. She had given me the knowledge I needed, shown me how to fight back. I could feel the weight of her absence now, like a missing piece of the puzzle I was still trying to solve. I walked along the cliffs, my eyes scanning the ocean, but I no longer feared it. I had confronted it, and for the first time since I arrived at Hollowtide Coast, I felt as though I understood it in some small way. But I knew there was still more to learn. The fog began to clear as I descended toward the beach, the once oppressive mist now drifting away, revealing the jagged rocks and deep fissures in the land where the sea had worn its mark for centuries. The tide wasn't my enemy anymore, not in the way it had been, but it was still a force that had shaped this land, this town, and my family. I could see the town below, quiet and still, the houses like silent sentinels beneath the overcast sky. Hollowtide was a place locked in time, its past a ghost that refused to leave. It was a place where memories clung to the land, to the air, to the people. I had to face the truth of my family's history, face what had really happened here, before I could truly leave it behind. I made my way into the heart of the town, past the old homes, their wooden exteriors peeling from years of salt and wind. The streets were empty, save for the occasional stray dog or cat, both of which eyed me warily before slinking back into the shadows. The silence was unsettling. The people of Hollowtide were still afraid, still haunted by the sea, and I couldn't blame them. They had seen what I had seen, what the tide could do. I found myself drawn to the old chapel on the outskirts of town, its stone walls weathered and worn, the stained glass windows cracked and darkened with age. The chapel had always been a place of refuge, they said, a place where the townsfolk went to pray when the storms came, a place where the survivors of the first disappearances had sought solace. Inside, it was cooler, the air thick with the scent of incense and old wood. The long pews were empty, their once polished surfaces now dulled by years of neglect. The altar at the front was covered in dust, the candles unlit. I stepped carefully over the worn stone floor, drawn to the far corner where the walls were lined with old bookshelves, filled with the remnants of a forgotten history. I reached for one of the leather-bound volumes, its spine cracked with age. It felt heavy in my hands, as though it held the weight of the town's secrets. When I opened it, I saw that it was filled with notes, sketches, and faded drawings, all of them depicting the sea, the tide, and what appeared to be symbols of ancient rituals. But what caught my attention the most were the names. Walsh. My father's name was written on the first page, along with the names of others from the town, some familiar, some not. As I flipped through the pages, I found more entries about the curse that had plagued Hollowtide for generations. How the first settlers had come to the coast, hoping to tame it, but instead had awakened something ancient, something buried deep beneath the sea. And then I saw it, a drawing of the very figure I had encountered on the cliff, the one who had claimed the tide as its own. Its features were still distorted in the sketch, but I could see the shape of it, the way it had risen from the water like an extension of the ocean itself. Below the drawing, there were more words. The tide is not a force of nature. It is a memory. The ocean remembers those who dared to conquer it. It feeds on those memories, drawing power from them. And those who come here are bound to it, whether they like it or not. It will call to them and they will answer whether they know it or not. The bloodline of the Walsh family has always been tied to it. The first of us to drown was a sacrifice, but it was not enough. It will always call to the last. Elen Walsh will be the final one. She will either join it or she will break it. My heart stopped. Elen Walsh. It was the same name. My name. The realization struck me like a hammer. My father had known. He had written about this even before his death. He had tried to fight it, to prevent it, but the tide had already claimed him. It had always been a part of our bloodline, our curse. But I wasn't just a victim in this story. I wasn't just the last in a long line of sacrifices. I had fought, and I had won. I closed the book and set it down gently on the altar. The tide would never truly leave Hollowtide Coast, but neither would it ever again control me. I stepped outside into the fading light of the afternoon. The town felt different now, as though the very air had shifted. The fog had lifted. The heavy weight that had plagued the land for so long was now gone. For the first time in years, the coast felt like it was alive in a new way, no longer consumed by the past, no longer bound to the memories of those who had drowned in its depths. I had broken the curse, but the sea was still there, still waiting. It would always be a part of me. The tide couldn't claim me any longer, but it would always call. And maybe that was okay. I had learned to live with the sea. I had learned to remember without being consumed by it. I turned my back on the chapel and walked down the winding road, toward the cliffs once more, where the waves crashed against the rocks below. The horizon was vast, endless. There were no answers to the questions that still lingered, but I knew now that I didn't need them. I had my own path to follow, and it wasn't dictated by the past. The sun was setting as I stood at the edge of the cliffs, watching the sky shift from soft gold to a deep, bruised purple. The sea stretched before me, vast and endless. I could still feel its pull, but it was different now. It wasn't the hunger I had known before, the deep, insidious tug that threatened to drag me under. It was simply the sea, a vast, powerful force of nature that could be respected, but not controlled. I had learned to let go of the past, but the sea was something I would never fully escape. And maybe, in some way, I didn't want to. It had shaped me like it had shaped Hollowtide. It was a part of who I was now. The weight of my father's legacy still hung heavy on me, but it didn't feel like a curse anymore. It felt like a warning, a lesson learned the hard way. He had given himself to the tide in an attempt to break its hold, to protect me. But in the end, he had only fed it. I could feel his presence in the back of my mind, still there, lingering like the scent of salt in the air. And I realized, with a sense of peace I hadn't known before, that he was gone. But his fight, his desire to protect me, was still a part of me. It wasn't a burden. It was my strength. I turned from the cliff and made my way back into town. The streets were quiet, the people still wary, still haunted by the sea. They didn't know everything I had learned, everything I had faced. And maybe that was for the best. They didn't need to know. They needed to live. They needed to let go of the past as I had. As I walked, I could feel the weight of the town's history pressing down on me. Hollowtide had always been a place defined by loss, by the cycle of drowning and hollowing. But now there was something new, something fresh. The town could heal if it allowed itself to. I paused by the old lighthouse, its weathered stones standing tall against the darkening sky. The light at the top was flickering, as though it was trying to remember how to shine. I could almost hear the whispers of those who had worked here, who had kept the light burning through the storm. They had been part of the tide's history too, part of the long line of lives lost to the sea. But it didn't have to end that way. Not anymore. I reached the edge of the town and stood for a moment, looking back at the streets, at the empty houses. The people here would continue on, just as I would. The curse of Hollowtide Coast had been broken, or at least its hold had been weakened. There was still much to do, much to repair, but I had learned one crucial thing. The past didn't have to define us. The memories of those who had gone before could either pull us down, or they could lift us up. I chose to rise. I took a deep breath, the salty air filling my lungs, and turned my back on the town. It was time to leave Hollowtide behind. The road ahead wasn't clear. There were still pieces of the puzzle left to solve, still questions about my family, about the curse, about the tide itself. But I didn't need to know everything right now. I knew that I could face whatever came next. The fire inside me had burned away the hollow feeling. It had given me something stronger. I was no longer just a victim of the sea. I was its survivor. As I walked away from Hollowtide, I glanced back once more. The cliffs, the waves, the town, everything was still there. But it felt different now. Less like a prison, more like a place where a story had ended. The tide had claimed many over the years, but it would never claim me. I had broken free, and for the first time in my life I felt truly free. The road stretched ahead of me, wide and open. The future was uncertain, but I was ready for it. Ready to write my own story, one that didn't end with the sea. I kept walking, the sound of the waves fading behind me, the weight of the past finally lifting. And though the sea would always be there, calling to me in the distance, I no longer felt its pull. I had learned to live with the tide, and now I was ready to live beyond it.